dissect. Welcome. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're turning the focus inward, dissecting the very operating system of the human mind, you could say. We're going deep into these, well, surprising systematic errors, the biases, the shortcuts that fundamentally govern how we judge things, how we make choices, often completely without our conscious awareness.
Yeah, it's really essential stuff. Because, most of us think our decisions are all about logic, right?
Yeah.
Cold, hard reason.
Yeah.
But the evidence, it shows something else entirely. Our thinking is just full of these glitches, predictable ones, repeatable ones. So the goal today really is to get a better language for talking about this, to understand these glitches, these errors.
Like learn the vocabulary for it.
Exactly. Moving beyond just, oops, bad decision, to really pinpoint why it happened, what was the pattern, the cognitive fingerprint, so to speak.
So we're not just learning about the mind, we're learning the language of the cognitive physician almost.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. When we use words like, say, bias or systematic error, we're describing something specific, something that pops up again and again in certain situations.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, take the halo effect. We've all seen it. The speaker walks on stage, super confident, looks sharp, tons of energy. We automatically and unfairly assume their ideas are going to be brilliant, maybe more brilliant than, say, a nervous speaker presenting the exact same stuff.
Right, the confidence gives them a halo.
Precisely. And giving that error a name, the halo effect, that's the first step. It helps us spot it, maybe even start to compensate for it.
Okay, so let's unpack this machinery then. Our mission today is to explore, four key parts of this. First, these two systems that seem to run our minds. Then, how these mental shortcuts, heuristics you call them, lead to these predictable biases.
Right.
Third, why we find statistics so incredibly difficult. And finally, how things like context and memory shape our preferences, our choices.
That covers the core ideas, yeah.
All right, let's meet the main characters in this cognitive drama, these two systems of thinking. You mentioned they're always operating when we're awake. System 1 and System 2, they're not actual brain parts, right? Just labels.
Exactly, just useful labels for two different ways our minds work. They're running constantly in parallel. System 1. Think of it as the intuitive system. It's automatic, super fast, effortless, really. It generates all those impressions, intuitions, gut feelings, intentions.
Like what sort of things?
Oh, knowing one object is further away than another. Completing the phrase salt and
pepper.
Right. You didn't have to think about that. Or you see the word vomit? Yeah, see? System 1 instantly gives you that feeling, that connection to sick. You don't choose it, it just happens. It's a machine for jumping to conclusions, but incredibly efficient.
So System 1 handles, the vast majority of our mental life, the easy stuff.
Pretty much. All the things that don't require intense focus, it frees up our mental resources.
Okay, then there's System 2. This sounds like the conscious part, the one doing the heavy lifting.
That's the one. System 2 is your conscious reasoning self, the one you identify as I. It's slow, it takes effort, it handles complex calculations, follows rules, makes deliberate choices, and, crucially, it's supposed to monitor the suggestions coming from System 1.
Supposed to?
Well, yeah. When things are easy, System 2 often just rubber stamps System 1's ideas. It's lazy. But if you hit a snag, something complex like, say, 23 times 78.
Uh-oh. Don't make me do that.
Exactly. Or if you need to override an impulse, then System 2 has to mobilize. It has to actually work.
And that's where we can see the conflict, right? When System 1 and System 2 clash.
Absolutely. There's some great experiments showing this. The Stroop task is a classic. You see words printed in different colors.
Right, like the word BLUE printed in red ink.
Exactly. Reading the word BLU, that's automatic. System 1 fires instantly. But if the task is to ignore the word and just name the color of the ink,
right,
you have to actively suppress that automatic reading response. That's System 2 exertion. You can feel the effort. It slows you right down.
And what's fascinating is that even when System 2 knows something isn't right, System 1 can still fool us.
Oh, absolutely. Take the Miller-Lyer illusion, those two lines with the fins.
Yeah, the arrows pointing in or out, one looks longer.
Right. But you can measure them. Your System 2 knows, logically, they're the exact same length.
But they don't look the same length.
Never. The visual impression from System 1 persists. You choose to believe the measurement, thanks to System 2, but you can't stop seeing the illusion. The only defense is learning to distrust your first impression in that specific situation.
Okay, so System 2 takes effort, real mental energy. And researchers actually found ways to measure this strain, like looking at pupils.
Yeah, the pupil dilation work is fascinating. It really is like a window to the soul, as Hess called it back then. Your pupil size is a very sensitive, real-time indicator of mental effort.
How does that work?
Well, they'd give people tasks needing sustained effort, like the add 3 task, hearing a string of digits and having to add 3 to each one quickly. As the difficulty ramps up, their pupils get wider, sometimes up to 50% larger. It shows peak mental load.
Wow.
And the moment they solve it, or just give up, the pupils shrink right back down. It's involuntary, a direct measure of cognitive strain.
Which tells us that mental effort is a limited resource. And pushing that limit has consequences, like becoming temporarily blind.
That's the idea of cognitive blindness. When System 2 is fully engaged, maxed out, you can miss things that are right there in plain sight.
Seriously?
Yeah. In one study, people were doing a demanding task, like holding numbers in memory, or that add 1 task, which is surprisingly tough. While they were doing it, a letter, like a big K, would appear on the screen. Nearly half the time, people didn't see it. Their eyes were open, looking right at it. But their attention was so consumed by the mental task, the visual just didn't register consciously.
That's kind of scary. It highlights how narrow our focus really is when we're concentrating hard.
It does. And this limited capacity leads straight to the law of least effort.
We're basically lazy thinkers.
Mentally lazy, yes. We're wired to conserve that precious System 2 energy. Our mental life usually runs at a comfortable pace, like a stroll. We avoid mental sprints if we can. Think about it. If you're walking and chatting with someone, and they suddenly ask you to calculate 23 times 78...
I stop walking immediately.
Exactly. You pause everything else. That shift from an easy stroll, handled by System 1, to a mental sprint needing System 2 is demanding. We instinctively avoid it.
And this links to ego depletion, right? The idea that there's one central pool of energy for all kinds of effort.
That's a really important finding. It suggests a unified system for self-control, whether it's cognitive effort like that calculation, or emotional control like biting your tongue, or even physical stamina. You're drawing from the same limited resource.
So if I resist eating a cookie...
Right, the famous radish and cookie study. If you force yourself to eat radishes while smelling delicious cookies you can't eat, you've depleted that self-control resource.
And then I'll be worse at the next task.
Precisely. Those radish eaters gave up much sooner on a subsequent difficult cognitive puzzle compared to people who got to eat the cookies or weren't tempted at all. They were mentally drained from that initial act of resistance.
Okay, but how is that different from just being overloaded, like having too much on my mind?
Good question. There's a subtle difference between ego depletion and cognitive load. Ego depletion often feels like a loss of motivation. If you offer a big enough reward, someone who's depleted might find the energy to push through.
Ah.
But with cognitive load, more effort isn't really an option. If your short-term memory is already holding, say, 6 digits, trying to hold a 7th or do a complex task at the same time, it's just not possible, no matter how motivated you are. System 2 is simply too busy.
And when System 2 is busy or depleted?
It becomes intellectually lazy. And that makes us much more likely to rely on those flawed System 1 shortcuts.
Right, so System 2 is often offline, basically. Lazy, busy, whatever, which lets System 1 run the show. And System 1 doesn't like tough questions, so it swaps them for easier ones using these heuristics, rules of thumb.
Exactly. And these substitutions, while efficient, lead directly to predictable systematic biases.
Let's start with a big one, representativeness, judging by resemblance.
That's the core idea. You judge how likely something is based purely on how much it resembles a stereotype or a typical example, often ignoring other crucial info.
The Steve example illustrates this perfectly, right? The librarian versus the farmer.
Yes, Steve. He's described as, let me get this right, very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with little interest in people. A meek and tidy soul. Passion for detail.
Okay, sounds like a librarian stereotype to me. My System 1 is screaming librarian.
And that's the representativeness heuristic in action. That quick match to the stereotype feels right. But people who choose librarians are ignoring a critical piece of information. The base rate.
The base rate.
The overall frequency of the population. At the time of the study, there were something like 20 male farmers for every 1 male librarian in the U.S.
Oh. So even if the description fits a librarian stereotype perfectly.
The sheer number of farmers means it's statistically far more probable that a randomly chosen man fitting that description is actually a farmer.
Wow. Okay. So the failure isn't System 1 seeing the resemblance.
No, System 1 is great at that. The failure is System 2's intellectual sloth. System 2, the only part that could combine the resemblance judgment with the base rate facts. But the System 1 answer feels so plausible, so coherent, that System 2 just accepts it and doesn't bother doing the extra work. We jump to the representative conclusion.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next? The availability heuristic. This one's about how easily things come to mind.
Exactly. We judge frequency or probability based on the ease with which examples or instances pop into our heads. It's another mental shortcut.
Like the letter K example.
Perfect one. Quick. Are there more English words that start with K or more that have K as the third letter?
Starting with K, king, kite, kangaroo. Easy. Third letter. Bake. Ask. It's harder to think of them, so start with K.
That's what most people say,
Yeah.
because it's much easier to search your memory for words starting with a letter. But statistically, letters like K, L, N, R, V are actually much more common in the third position. The ease of retrieval fools us into overestimating the frequency of first-letter Ks.
And this isn't just about letters, is it? This explains a lot about public perception of risk and importance.
Oh, massively. Think about media coverage. If there's a dramatic, vivid event, a plane crash maybe, or a celebrity death.
Like Michael Jackson, you mentioned.
Right. It gets covered constantly. It's emotionally charged. It becomes highly available in our minds. So we naturally perceive it as being more significant or more likely to happen again than maybe less dramatic, but statistically more important issues. Like the slow creep of declining education standards or complex financial risks. These things are abstract, hard to visualize. They don't generate easy stories or vivid images. So they seem less urgent, less available.
That's quite concerning. It means our sense of what's important can be easily manipulated by what the media chooses to focus on.
It absolutely can. And historically, you see this exploited. Controlling the narrative, controlling what becomes salient and available in the public consciousness is a powerful tool. It shapes public fear, public priorities.
Okay. Moving on to another System 1 trait. Its tendency to build stories, even with limited data. This is WISIATI.
WISIATI. What you see is all there is. System 1 is a fantastic storyteller. It takes whatever information is immediately present and weaves the most coherent story possible out of it. And crucially, the quality or the amount of that information doesn't much affect the confidence System 1 has in the story. It just works with what it's got.
The Mindic example makes this clear.
Right. If I ask you, will Mindic be a good leader? She's intelligent and strong. What's your immediate gut feeling?
Yes, sounds good. Intelligent, strong, leader qualities.
Exactly. System 1 delivers an instant yes. It creates a coherent, positive picture. What it doesn't do is ask the critical System 2 question. Hang on, is intelligent and strong enough information to judge leadership potential? What else do I need to know? What am I missing?
It just runs with the info it has.
It runs with what it sees. WISIATI. And this strongly reinforces first impressions, like the halo effect we talked about earlier.
And this even trips up professionals. The story about grading essays really stuck with me.
It's a great illustration. If a professor grades all of one student's essays back-to-back.
Essay 1, then Essay 2, then Essay 3 for student A.
Right. If Essay 1 is fantastic, it creates a positive halo. The professor subconsciously expects Essay 2 to be good too, and might grade it more leniently. The grades tend to be overly consistent. But one professor tried a different method. He graded all the answers to question 1 for all students first, then all answers to question 2, and so on.
So he was comparing apples to apples for each question, but breaking the student-by-student consistency.
Exactly. And what happened? His confidence in his grading plummeted.
Why?
Because he was constantly confronted with inconsistency. A student might have a brilliant answer to question 1, but a really poor one for question 2. Grading sequentially hid that variance, creating a false, comforting sense of coherence thanks to the halo effect. The shuffled method revealed the actual inconsistency, making the grading more accurate, but feel less certain.
Fascinating. Okay, one more big one in this section. The anchoring effect. This seems almost bizarrely powerful.
It really is one of the most robust findings. Our estimates get stuck or anchored to any number that we happen to consider, even if that number is completely random and irrelevant.
The Wheel of Fortune study is the classic demonstration here.
Yes, unforgettable study. People spun a wheel that was secretly rigged to stop only on 10 or 65.
Okay.
Then, after seeing that random number, they were asked to estimate something totally unrelated. The percentage of African nations in the UN.
And the number they saw on the wheel influenced their estimate.
Massively. People who saw the wheel stop at 65 guessed, on average, that 45% of UN nations were African. Those who saw the number 10, their average guess was only 25%.
That's a huge difference based on a number they knew was random.
Absolutely. The anchor pulled their estimate strongly in its direction.
Now, you mentioned there are actually two different ways anchoring works. It's not just one thing.
That's right. It's driven by two distinct mechanisms involving both systems. The first is a System 1 priming effect, also called suggestion. I ask you a silly question like, did Gandhi die before or after age 144?
Okay, obviously before.
Right, but just mentioning that absurdly high number, 144, activates related thoughts in your mind. Concepts of very old, ancient. So when you then estimate his actual age at death, that priming unconsciously pulls your estimate higher than it might have been otherwise. System 1 selectively looks for evidence compatible with the anchor.
Even if the anchor is ridiculous.
Even then. And the second mechanism involves System 2. It's called insufficient adjustment. When we encounter an anchor, especially one we know is a bit off, System 2 tries to consciously adjust away from it. Okay, the house listing price is $500K. That seems high. Maybe it's worth less.
But we don't adjust far enough.
Exactly. We start adjusting, but we tend to stop too soon, usually at the nearest point that feels plausible. It's effortful to keep adjusting, so if the anchor is high, our final estimate stays too high. If it's low, our estimate stays too low. System 2's laziness strikes again.
And this isn't just for lab experiments or guessing games. It affects professionals too, even if they deny it.
Oh, absolutely. Experienced real estate agents were shown to be significantly influenced by the listing price of a house, a number that can be arbitrary even when evaluating its true value.
And they probably insisted they weren't influenced.
They did. They denied it affected their professional judgment. But the data showed otherwise. Their valuations were clearly anchored by the listing price, just like inexperienced students were. Anchoring is everywhere. Negotiations, sentencing recommendations, medical diagnoses. It's a powerful, pervasive bias.
Okay, so System 1 uses these shortcuts, loves coherence, gets anchored. It leads to some serious issues when we try to predict things, especially involving statistics, and it messes with our sense of expertise. Let's start with a real mind-bender. The conjunction fallacy.
The Linda problem. This one really highlights the battle between intuition and logic.
Remind us about Linda.
Okay, Linda is described as 31 years old, single, outspoken, very bright, majored in philosophy, deeply concerned with discrimination, social justice, participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations.
Okay, got the picture. Very progressive activist type.
Right. Now, which is more probable? A, Linda is a bank teller, or B, Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement?
Well, the description makes feminist bank teller seem way more likely. It fits the story.
And that's what almost everyone says. Option B feels more representative of Linda's description. It's a more plausible story.
But logically, that can't be right, can it?
Logically, it's impossible. Think about it in terms of sets. The group feminist bank tellers is entirely inside the larger group, all bank tellers.
Right. There have to be more bank tellers overall than there are specifically feminist bank tellers.
Exactly. So option A must be more probable than option B. It's a basic rule of probability. A single condition is always more probable than that condition plus another condition.
Yet most people get it wrong, even smart people.
Astonishingly often. We're talking 85 to 90% of undergraduates in the original studies. People who understand logic choose the less probable but more representative, more coherent story. System 1's intuition for plausibility just overwhelms System 2's grasp of logic.
Is there a way to make the logic clearer to help System 2 win?
Yes, there is. The error rate drops dramatically if you rephrase the question using frequencies instead of probabilities. Instead of asking which is more probable, you ask, imagine 100 women who fit Linda's description. How many of them are bank tellers? And how many are feminist bank tellers?
Okay. That makes me picture groups of people.
Precisely. It triggers a more spatial, statistical way of thinking in System 2. You immediately see that the feminist bank tellers must be a smaller group within the larger group of all bank tellers. The relationship of inclusion becomes obvious.
So changing the frame helps us access the logic?
It does.
Yeah.
Frequency formats seem to engage System 2 more effectively for this kind of problem.
Okay. Next statistical hurdle, the illusion of understanding, particularly regression to the mean. This one feels deeply counterintuitive.
It really is. Our minds are desperate to find causal explanations for everything. If B happens after A, we instinctively feel A must have caused B. Regression to the mean messes with this because it describes a statistical tendency, an effect of imperfect correlation without a simple cause and effect story.
The flight instructor story is the classic example here, right?
Perfect example. This Israeli Air Force instructor was convinced that praising pilots for exceptionally good landings made them do worse the next time.
Okay.
And screaming at them for exceptionally bad landings made them do better the next time.
So his conclusion was punishment works, praise doesn't.
That was his firm belief based on his direct experience. But he was completely misinterpreting the situation because of regression to the mean.
How?
Think about it. When did he praise pilots?
Mm.
Only after an exceptionally good landing, right? A performance that was likely way above their average skill level, probably involving some luck.
Okay.
What's most likely to happen after an exceptionally good performance?
Probably. Something closer to average.
Exactly. A regression toward their mean performance. It would likely have happened anyway, praise or no praise. And conversely, he only screamed after an exceptionally bad landing, likely below their average, maybe involving bad luck. The next landing was statistically very likely to be better, closer to their average, regardless of the screaming.
So he thought his praise was hurting and his criticism was helping, but it was just statistics, random fluctuations.
Precisely. He attached a causal story, praise is bad, criticism is good, to what was simply the statistical reality of performance varying around an average.
This explains so many things, like the supposed Sports Illustrated jinx or sophomore slumps.
Absolutely. Extraordinary performance is often followed by more ordinary performance. That's regression. But our minds crave causes, so we invent stories about jinxes or pressure instead of acknowledging the statistics.
And this isn't just about performance, right? It applies to things like health, too.
Yes, the example of depressed children is important. If you take a group of kids who are currently very depressed and measure them again later, they will on average show some improvement.
Even with no treatment.
Even with no treatment, or even with a silly treatment like, say, hugging a cat every day. Because being very depressed is an extreme state. Over time, it's statistically likely to regress towards a more average mood state.
So to know if the cat hugging actually worked, you'd need
A control group. A similar group of very depressed kids who didn't hug cats. Only by comparing the groups can you see if the intervention had an effect beyond mere regression. Ignoring regression leads us to constantly overestimate the effectiveness of interventions applied to extreme cases.
This feels like a minefield for anyone trying to evaluate, well, anything. Which brings us to expert intuition. When should we actually trust an expert's gut feeling?
That's the million-dollar question. True expert intuition isn't magic. Herbert Simon nailed it. Intuition is nothing more and nothing less than recognition.
Recognition.
Yeah, it's the result of thousands of hours of practice in a specific domain. That practice builds up a vast library of patterns in long-term memory. The expert instantly recognizes a familiar pattern and knows the likely associated outcome or action.
Okay, so it's learned pattern matching.
Exactly. But for this intuition to be valid, two conditions absolutely must be met. First, the environment needs to be sufficiently regular to be predictable. Think chess, diagnosing certain diseases, firefighting. There are stable cues and relationships to be learned.
And second,
The expert needs the opportunity to learn these regularities through prolonged practice with good, timely feedback. Years of seeing patterns and learning what follows.
so chess masters, experienced firefighters, maybe some doctors, their intuition can be trustworthy because the conditions are right.
Generally, yes. Their gut feelings are often based on genuine recognition of valid cues. The big problem is the illusion of validity. This happens when experts operate in environments that are not regular or predictable zero-validity environments.
Like what?
Think long-term political forecasting, predicting the stock market, evaluating complex job candidates based on interviews. These are inherently noisy, unpredictable systems.
But the people doing it often sound incredibly confident.
That's the illusion. Their subjective confidence is sky high. Why? Because of WISID again. System 1 builds a coherent story based on the limited information available. This candidate interviewed well, seems smart, fits the culture, therefore they'll succeed. The coherence of the story creates a powerful feeling of knowing, a strong intuition.
Even if the story has no actual predictive power.
Even then, the confidence comes from the internal consistency of the narrative, not from any objective assessment of predictive accuracy based on past results. Stock pickers are notoriously confident, yet their performance is largely indistinguishable from luck.
So if human intuition is so unreliable in these noisy areas, what's the alternative? The research points towards formulas.
It does, quite strongly. Simple statistical algorithms and formulas consistently outperform human expert judgment in these low-validity, noisy environments.
Even simple formulas.
Often, yes. Think of the APGAR score for newborns, a simple checklist. Or even models for predicting marital stability based on just a couple of factors. They beat experts for two main reasons. One, Formulas are consistent. They apply the same rules and weigh the same factors every single time. 2, humans are, as the book puts it, incorrigibly inconsistent.
Meaning?
Meaning even the same expert looking at the exact same information on 2 different occasions will often give different judgments. Radiologists reevaluating the same X-ray might contradict their own previous judgment up to 20% of the time.
Oh.
If your judgment isn't consistent even with itself, how can it be reliably predictive? Formulas don't have bad days. They don't get distracted by irrelevant details. They don't fall for coherent but misleading stories. They just apply the rules.
Yeah.
And in noisy environments, that consistency wins.
Okay, we've covered judgment and prediction. Let's switch gears to how we make choices. This brings us to prospect theory, which sounds like a major shift from older ideas.
It was revolutionary. Before prospect theory, economics assumed decisions were based on rational calculations of final wealth states, like econs choosing what gives them the most absolute wealth in the end.
But prospect theory says that's not how we think.
Not at all. It shows that we evaluate outcomes not in terms of absolute wealth, but as gains and losses relative to a reference point. And that reference point is usually our current situation, the status quo.
And the absolute key finding here is loss aversion.
Absolutely central. Loss aversion means that the pain of a loss feels roughly twice as powerful psychologically as the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Losing $100 hurts twice as much as gaining $100 feels good.
That's the general finding, yes. This asymmetry has huge consequences for our choices. The psychological value function is really steep for losses and much flatter for gains.
Which makes us
Extremely risk-averse when facing choices that involve both a potential gain and a potential loss, what are called mixed gambles.
like if you offered me a coin flip, heads I win $200, tails I lose $100. Rationally, the expected value is positive, $50. I should take it.
A purely rational econ would take it every time.
Yeah.
But most real humans, they reject it.
Because the fear of losing the $100 outweighs the prospect of winning $200.
By about 2 to 1, the psychological pain of that potential loss looms much larger. You'd probably need to offer a potential gain closer to $250 or even $300 to make the average person willing to risk losing that $100.
And this intense dislike of losing things explains the endowment effect, why we overvalue stuff just because we own it.
It's a direct consequence, yes. Once something is part of your endowment, giving it up feels like a loss, and losses hurt. The mugs experiment showed this beautifully.
Tell me about the mugs.
Okay, they randomly gave coffee mugs to half the participants. These became the sellers. The other half were buyers. They asked the sellers the minimum price they'd sell their mug for. They asked the buyers the maximum price they'd pay for the exact same mug.
The big difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah.
The sellers, because giving up the mug felt like a loss, demanded about $7.12 on average. The buyers, who saw acquiring the mug as a potential gain, were only willing to pay around $2.87.
More than double, just based on who owned it initially.
Exactly. And there was a third group, the choosers, who didn't get a mug, but could choose between getting a mug or getting cash. They valued the mug much like the buyers, around $3.12. It's the owning that triggers loss aversion and inflates the value for the sellers. Giving it up hurts.
The status quo is incredibly sticky then. Does this mean that any kind of reform, say in politics, that asks people to give up something they currently have, even for a bigger future benefit, is just really hard to sell?
It's incredibly difficult politically. Prospect theory predicts exactly that. People frame the removal of a current benefit as a loss, and that loss feels immediate and painful. The promised future gain often feels abstract and less certain. Loss aversion heavily favors the status quo, making reforms that involve perceived takeaways very unpopular, even if they're objectively beneficial long-term.
Though you mentioned this effect isn't set in stone, like traders don't show it.
Right. Experienced market traders, dealing with goods purely for exchange like stocks or commodities, tend not to show the endowment effect for those goods. They've learned, in that specific context, to think more like econs, focusing on transaction value rather than ownership.
But for the rest of us, loss aversion shapes our sense of fairness, too.
Profoundly. Our intuitions about what's fair are deeply tied to reference points and avoiding imposed losses.
Like the snow shovel example during a blizzard.
Yes. The normal price of a shovel, say $20, is the reference point. If a store suddenly jacks up the price to $30 just because there's high demand during the storm.
Feels like price gouging. Unfair.
Exactly. About 82% of people surveyed saw that as highly unfair. The store is imposing a loss relative to the expected price, exploiting the situation. Similarly, cutting an employee's wages, say from $9 to $7 an hour, just because the company could hire others cheaper, is seen as deeply unfair by over 80% of people. It imposes a loss relative to their current wage.
But not giving a raise when costs go down is okay.
Generally seen as acceptable, yes, because that doesn't impose a direct loss relative to the current wage reference point. Fairness norms are powerfully shaped by loss aversion.
Okay, so our choices aren't based on objective reality, but on gains and losses from a reference point. And this makes us vulnerable to the power of framing.
Usually vulnerable. How a choice is described, the language used, can completely flip our preferences, even if the underlying outcomes are identical. Our preferences are frame-bound, not reality-bound.
The Asian disease problem is the killer example here, isn't it?
It's the classic demonstration. You have this scenario. A disease is expected to kill 600 people. There are 2 programs to fight it.
Version 1 frames it in terms of lives saved, gains.
Right. Option A saves 200 lives for sure. Option B, a 13 chance of saving all 600 and a 23 chance of saving no one.
What do people choose?
Overwhelmingly, they choose the sure thing, Program A. They become risk-averse when dealing with potential gains. Saving 200 for sure feels better than gambling.
Okay. But then you present the exact same outcomes, just framed differently in terms of deaths, losses.
Exactly. Now it's Program C, 400 people will die for sure. Or Program D, a 13 chance that nobody will die and a 23 chance that 600 will die.
Which is statistically identical to the first choice set.
Identical outcomes. But now, faced with losses, people flip. They become risk-seeking. They overwhelmingly choose the gamble, Program D, to avoid the certain loss of 400 lives.
Wow. Same problem, opposite choices, just based on wording.
It shows powerfully how framing interacts with loss aversion. We hate losses, so we gamble to avoid them. We like gains, so we lock them in.
And this isn't just hypothetical. Bad framing has real-world costs, like the MPG illusion.
Yes, a very costly example. In the U.S., fuel efficiency is framed as miles per gallon, MPG.
Seems intuitive. Higher MPG is better.
It seems intuitive, but it's deeply misleading for comparing improvements. The relationship between MPG and actual fuel saved, which is what matters for cost and environment, is nonlinear.
How so?
Improving a gas guzzler from, say, 10 mpg to 11 mpg saves vastly more gasoline over a year than improving an already efficient car from 40 mpg to 41 mpg.
Even though both are a 1 mpg improvement.
Right. The correct frame to see this clearly is gallons per 100 miles or gallons per mile. That shows savings directly. Because the U.S. used the misleading MPG frame for decades, people and policymakers systematically undervalued improvements on the least efficient vehicles where the biggest savings were possible. It led to poor choices, higher costs, more pollution. Bad framing has consequences.
And finally, framing even affects how we keep track of money in our heads, mental accounts and sunk costs.
Yeah, we don't treat all money as fungible, even though logically we should. We create mental categories or accounts. The theater ticket example shows this. Imagine you bought a $10 ticket for a play. Scenario 1. You get to the theater and realize you've lost the ticket. Do you buy another $10 ticket?
Feels bad. Like if the play now costs $20, maybe not.
That's what many people feel. About 54% in the study said they wouldn't buy another ticket. The loss is mentally charged to the theater play account, making the play seem too expensive.
Okay, scenario 2.
Scenario 2. You get to the theater, ticket in hand, but realize you've lost a $10 bill from your wallet sometime earlier that day. Do you still buy the $10 ticket?
Yeah, probably. Losing the cash is annoying, but it feels separate from the cost of the play.
Exactly. Most people say they would buy the ticket in this case. The lost $10 is charged to some general cash account, not the specific play account. So the perceived cost of the play remains $10.
Even though in both scenarios you're out $10 and deciding whether the play is worth another $10.
Rationally, the decision should be identical. But our mental accounting, the framing of the loss, changes our choice. It makes us susceptible to the sunk cost fallacy, reluctant to abandon something just because we've already invested in it. Like paying $20 for the play in the first scenario feels like a sunk cost.
This leads us to the final section, which feels almost philosophical. The idea that we have two selves, an experiencing self and a remembering self.
Yes, this is a profound distinction with huge implications for how we think about happiness and well-being. The experiencing self is the one living life moment by moment. It's the self that feels pleasure or pain right now. If you could measure its feelings continuously, you'd get a sum total of experience utility over time.
Okay, the self living in the present.
Right. But then there's the remembering self. This is the self that looks back, evaluates experiences after they're over, tells the stories of our lives, And importantly, it's the self that makes decisions about the future.
And these two selves don't always agree.
They often disagree quite strongly, because the remembering self is a terrible record keeper of actual experience. It's subject to major biases.
Specifically, duration neglect and the peak end rule.
Exactly. The remembering self pretty much ignores how long an experience actually lasted, duration neglect. Instead, its overall assessment is dominated almost entirely by two things: the feeling at the most intense moment, peak, and the feeling right at the very end.
Duration doesn't matter, only the peak in the end. That seems crazy.
This leads to some very strange choices. The cold hand study is the most striking evidence.
What happened there?
Participants put one hand in painfully cold water for 60 seconds. That was the short trial. A measure of their moment-to-moment pain was taken.
Okay, unpleasant.
Then, with the other hand, they did a long trial. This involved the same 60 seconds of painfully cold water, plus an extra 30 seconds where the water temperature was raised slightly, still cold and unpleasant, but less so than the initial 60 seconds.
So the second trial was longer and involved objectively more total time in pain.
Correct. More total integrated pain, according to the experiencing self. But then afterwards, they were asked which trial they would prefer to repeat if they had to do one again.
What did they choose? Please don't say the longer one.
They overwhelmingly chose to repeat the longer, objectively more painful trial.
Why?
Because of the peak end rule. The longer trial, even though it had more total pain, had a slightly less painful ending. The last 30 seconds were less awful than the peak pain. The remembering self focused on that less bad end and neglected the overall duration. It formed a slightly less negative memory of the longer trial. And it's the remembering self making the choice about the future.
So we choose future experiences based on flawed memories, not on the actual total pleasure or pain lived through.
That's exactly what the evidence suggests. We're choosing to maximize the quality of our future memories, not necessarily our future experiences.
We even see this when evaluating a whole life.
The Gen Life evaluation study showed this. People were told about Jen, who lived a long, generally happy life. When asked to rate the total desirability of her life, doubling the duration of her happy years had almost no impact on the ratings.
Duration neglect again.
Exactly. A life is evaluated like a story. The ending matters hugely. Intense moments matter, but the sheer length of the happy periods gets largely ignored by the remembering self.
This flawed memory system seems to set us up for the focusing illusion.
It does. The focusing illusion is summed up by the phrase, "Nothing in life is as important as you think it is when you are thinking about it."
Meaning?
When we consider the impact of any single factor on our well-being, like moving to a sunnier climate, getting a big raise, getting married, or even suffering an injury, we focus intently on that one thing. And in that moment of focus, we vastly exaggerate its likely long-term importance for our overall happiness.
The California versus Midwest study showed this clearly.
Perfectly. Students in both California and the Midwest were asked about their own happiness and the happiness of students in the other region.
And everyone thought the Californians must be happier because of the weather.
Yep. Both groups assumed climate was a major driver of happiness, so Californians must be happier. But when they reported their own life satisfaction, there was absolutely no difference between the Midwesterners and the Californians.
So when you think about climate, it seems crucial. But in daily life?
In daily life, climate is just background noise for most people most of the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't determine your overall well-being nearly as much as you think it does when you're specifically focusing on it. The focusing illusion makes us misjudge what actually makes for long-term happiness.
And this applies to negative things, too. We overestimate the misery of, say, a disability.
Very much so. When able-bodied people are asked to imagine the mood of someone who is paraplegic, they tend to predict near-constant unhappiness, because they focus entirely on the disability itself and all the things the person can't do. They fail to account for adaptation. Over time, attention shifts. The person with paraplegia, while facing challenges, stops thinking about their condition constantly. Their attention shifts back to everyday concerns, joys, and annoyances. Studies tracking mood find that people with paraplegia report being in a fairly good mood more than half the time, usually starting about a month after the injury. Much better than outsiders predict, because outsiders get caught in the focusing illusion.
Wow. Okay, this has been well, a really deep dive into how our minds work and often how they fail us. We've got this fast, intuitive system one, useful, but full of biases like anchoring availability, ignoring statistics, and then the slow, effortful system two, which should monitor system one, but is often lazy or busy.
That's the fundamental tension, yes.
Yeah.
And understanding this, getting the vocabulary availability, representativeness, loss aversion, framing, WYSID, it's not really about catching ourselves in the act of bias. That's incredibly hard.
So what's the point then?
The real value is in recognizing these patterns, in the decisions and judgments of others, and in the way organizations make plans. It's about developing informed gossip, you could say, or informed criticism.
Being a better observer of flawed thinking around us.
Exactly. And using that understanding to improve collective decision-making.
So, if knowledge alone doesn't stop bias in its tracks, is there a practical technique organizations can use, something derived from this research?
Yes, there's a really clever one popularized by Gary Klein called the premortem.
Pre-mortem, like before death.
Kind of. Imagine an organization is on the verge of launching a major new plan or strategy. Everyone's feeling pretty optimistic. Before the final sign-off, the leader gathers the team and says something like this. Okay, imagine it's 1 year from now. We implemented this plan exactly as we decided, and it was a complete, unmitigated disaster. A total failure. Take the next 10 minutes and write down a brief history of why it failed.
Oh, I like that. It completely flips the script from optimistic promotion to critical analysis.
Precisely. It does several things. It legitimizes doubt, overcoming groupthink, where people might be afraid to voice concerns, and crucially, it leverages WYSIAD in a useful way. By framing the outcome as a definite failure, it forces people System 1 and System 2 to search for potential problems, risks, and overlooked flaws that the optimistic "it will succeed" frame naturally ignores.
It unleashes knowledgeable pessimism,
In a
basically.
very constructive way. It forces a consideration of what might go wrong, pushing back against that natural coherence-seeking confirmation bias of System 1. It's a fantastic reality check.
A great practical tool. Okay, so wrapping this up. Thinking about System 1's gullibility, how easily it believes things, especially when System 2 is busy, and how powerfully framing affects our choices. It leaves me with a final thought for you, our listeners. Consider something like fairness around taxes. Research shows you can get dramatically different public opinions just by framing a policy as removing a tax exemption for some group which feels like a gain being taken away, a loss, versus imposing a tax surcharge on another group relative to a different baseline which feels like an imposed loss. The substance might be identical, but the frame dictates the moral intuition for many people. So the provocative question is, if our moral and political judgments are so easily swayed by the frame rather than the reality of an issue, how can we ensure our most important decisions as individuals and as a society are genuinely reality bound? How do we get past the frame to the substance? That, I think, is the critical challenge that emerges from understanding this machinery of the mind. Something to really chew on.